The rain had not stopped since morning, and Elira Wynne's hands were raw from scrubbing the stone floor of Lord Cassius Thorne's kitchen. Her knees ached against the cold ground. She did not look up when the door opened, because looking up only invited trouble. "Still on the floor, are you?" Thorne's voice carried the lazy cruelty she had learned to expect. He stood in the doorway with his boots still muddy from his ride, watching her the way a man watches an insect he has not yet decided to crush. "Slower every day. Perhaps I overpaid for you." Elira said nothing. 3 years of silence had taught her that words only gave him more to mock. She kept scrubbing until he grew bored and left, his footsteps echoing down the corridor, like the ticking of a clock counting down to nothing. She had not always lived this way. Once her family had a modest home, a warm hearth, and enough to eat without fear. Then her father's debts came due all at once, and the world she knew folded in on itself. Her father passed within the year, broken by shame. Her mother followed soon after, worn down by grief. Elira, with no other family to claim her, had been sold into indenture to settle what remained of the debt. Lord Thorne had purchased her contract the way a man buys a plow horse, and he treated her accordingly. She had stopped hoping for rescue long ago. Hope, she had learned, was a luxury that cost more than she could afford. It was a Tuesday, unremarkable in every way, when the carriage arrived. Elira was carrying firewood across the courtyard when she saw it, a black carriage trimmed in silver, drawn by 4 matched horses. She had never seen anything so fine arrive at Thorne's modest estate. Word moved quickly through the servants' quarters. It belonged to Duke Alaric Vane, a nobleman from the northern counties, known for his wealth, his sharp intellect, and his famous unwillingness to attend social functions unless duty demanded it. He had come on some matter of business, something to do with land boundaries and old family agreements. Elira paid it little mind. Dukes and lords were the same to her now, distant creatures whose comings and goings meant nothing to a woman on her knees scrubbing floors. But that evening, as she carried a tray of tea into the drawing room, she made a mistake. Her foot caught the edge of the rug, and the tray tilted. Only 1 cup spilled, a small stain spreading across the fine carpet, but Thorne rose from his chair with a fury that seemed far too large for the offense. "Clumsy, worthless girl," he snapped, gripping her arm hard enough to bruise. "Do you know what that rug cost? More than your entire contract, I would wager." Elira lowered her eyes, bracing for what usually came next, the sharp words, the threat of reduced rations, sometimes worse. But this time, a quiet voice cut through the room. "That will be enough, Thorne." Both Thorne and Elira turned. The Duke had risen from his own seat near the window, where he had been observing the estate's business with an expression Elira had not noticed until now, cool, unreadable, and entirely unimpressed. "She spilled a cup of tea," Alaric said. "Release her arm." Thorne, startled but unwilling to appear weak before a man of higher rank, forced a laugh and let go. "My apologies, Your Grace. The girl is simply careless. One must be firm with servants, or they grow lazy." Alaric said nothing further on the matter that night, but Elira noticed the way his gaze lingered on her bruised arm before she left the room, and something in his expression stayed with her long after she had returned to her small quarters. Not pity, she thought, something closer to quiet calculation. 2 days later, Thorne summoned her to his study, wearing the pleased expression he reserved for moments when profit was involved. "You are a fortunate woman, though you hardly deserve it," he said, sliding a paper across his desk without looking at her. "The Duke has purchased your remaining indenture. Effective immediately, you belong to his household." Elira's stomach tightened. Belong. The word struck her like a physical blow, no matter how gently it was dressed. A new master was still a master. She was brought before Duke Alaric that same afternoon, standing in the modest receiving room of the inn, where he had taken lodging while conducting his business. He studied her for a long moment, and she braced herself, waiting for whatever condition would come next, whatever price attached itself to his apparent kindness. "I did not purchase your contract to keep you as a servant," he said finally. "I am releasing you from indenture entirely. You are free, Miss Wynne." Elira blinked, certain she had misheard. "Free," she repeated carefully, as though testing the word for traps. "Freely and fully," Alaric confirmed. However, I do have one condition, and I would ask you to hear it before you decide anything." Here it comes, she thought. There is always a condition. "Thorn is not a man who forgives being outmaneuvered," Alaric continued. "If you leave here alone, with no protection and no standing, he may find ways to make your freedom difficult, through influence, through rumor, through means that do not require breaking any law. I am asking you to stay under my protection for 1 year, as a ward of my household, not as a servant, not as property. You would want for nothing, and you would owe me nothing beyond your presence. At the end of that year, if you wish to leave and never see me again, you may do so, and your freedom will remain entirely your own." Alira studied his face for the lie she was certain must be hiding somewhere in his words. She found none, only the same quiet steadiness she had noticed in Thorn's drawing room. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "You do not know me." Alaric was quiet for a moment. "I saw how he treated you," he said simply. "I found that I could not walk away and pretend I had not seen it." She agreed, though not out of trust. She agreed because she had nowhere else to go, and because some small, stubborn part of her wanted to believe that kindness without a hidden cost might actually exist in the world. The first weeks at Alaric's estate felt like a dream she expected to wake from at any moment. Her room was warm and her own, with a bed that did not creak with age, and a window that looked out over gardens instead of mud. She was given new clothes, plain but well made, and told she was free to spend her days as she wished. When she offered to help in the kitchens out of habit, the staff seemed confused by the request, though they welcomed her regardless, and she found herself laughing for the first time in years over shared stories in the warm kitchen air. She waited for the demand to come, the favor owed, the debt called in, the true nature of the man revealing itself the way Thorn's always had. But weeks passed, then a month, and Alaric asked nothing of her beyond polite company at dinner, where he spoke to her as though her opinions carried genuine weight. She learned, slowly, that he was not a man given to warmth in company, and that his reputation for coldness among the nobility was not entirely unearned. But alone, in quiet moments, she saw glimpses of something else. A man who had grown up under a father as harsh as Thorn, who had learned early that showing weakness invited cruelty, and who had built walls around himself as a form of survival rather than arrogance. "My father believed kindness was a weakness to be beaten out of a man," Alaric told her one evening, as they sat near the fire in the library, a rare moment of openness between them. "I spent most of my life believing him. It was easier that way." "What changed?" Alira asked. He considered the question longer than she expected. "I am not certain anything changed," he said. "Perhaps I simply grew tired of being the kind of man my father wanted me to be." She found herself drawn to him in ways she had not anticipated, not out of gratitude, though gratitude was certainly present, but out of genuine affection that grew slowly and honestly, built on small moments rather than grand gestures. He remembered details she mentioned only once. He left books on subjects she had shown curiosity about, never demanding she read them, simply leaving the door open. When she expressed interest in learning to read music, he arranged for a tutor without a single word of obligation attached. Alira began to hope again, cautiously, the way one tests ice before stepping onto it fully. But hope, she would learn, still had enemies. Word of her changed circumstances reached Thorn within a few months, carried by the kind of gossip that travels faster than any carriage. Furious that a woman he had once controlled now lived in comfort under a duke's protection, and perhaps more furious at what her freedom implied about his own conduct, Thorn began spreading rumors through the social circles he still commanded. He suggested, in careful and deniable language, that Alira was not truly a ward at all, but a kept woman, purchased for purposes far less honorable than protection. The rumors reached a gathering hosted by a mutual acquaintance of both men, a formal evening attended by much of the local nobility. Alira, present at Alaric's side for the first time in such company, felt the whispers before she heard the words clearly, the sideways glances, the conversations that fell silent as she passed. Thorn, emboldened by drink and old resentment, made his accusations openly before the assembled guests, loud enough that pretending not to hear was no longer possible. "A ward, is she?" he said, his voice carrying across the room with practiced cruelty. How convenient a word for a duke's companion. Tell me, your grace, does your ward share your table alone as well as your roof? The room went quiet, waiting. Illyra felt the old fear rise in her chest, the instinct to shrink, to disappear, to let the moment pass in silence the way she always had. But something else rose alongside it, something that had grown slowly over the past months without her fully noticing. A refusal to be spoken about, as though she were not present, as though she had no voice of her own. Before Alaric could respond, Illyra stepped forward. Lord Thorn knows precisely what I endured under his roof, she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. He knows the bruises he left, the threats he made, the years he took from me while calling it discipline. If he wishes to discuss what is convenient, let him explain to this room why a woman under his care arrived at the Duke's household, thinner than a servant should be, and marked in ways no accident could explain. The silence that followed was different this time, heavier, turning slowly toward Thorn instead of her. Alaric spoke next, his voice calm but carrying an authority that filled the room without need for volume. I did not purchase Miss Wynne's freedom for the reasons you suggest, Thorn. I purchased it because I witnessed your treatment of her firsthand, and I found I could not, in good conscience, leave her under your control a moment longer. If you wish to discuss what is honorable conduct between a nobleman and those in his care, I welcome that conversation, publicly and in detail. Thorn's bravado faltered under the weight of witnesses who had, until that moment, only suspected the truth of his reputation. Within weeks, doors that had once opened easily for him began closing, quietly but firmly, as word of his conduct spread beyond what rumor alone could have managed. For Illyra, the moment marked something larger than Thorn's downfall. She had spoken for herself, fully and without fear, for the first time since her family's ruin had taken her voice along with everything else. She realized, walking beside Alaric back to the carriage that night, that she was no longer the frightened woman who had scrubbed floors on her knees, waiting for cruelty to find her again. The year of her protection passed, and on the evening it concluded, Alaric requested a private conversation in the same library where they had shared so many quiet evenings together. Your year is complete, he said. Your freedom was never conditional, and it remains entirely your own. If you wish to leave, to build a life elsewhere, I will ensure you have everything you need to do so comfortably. Illyra felt her heart tighten, though not with fear this time. And if I do not wish to leave? Alaric's composure, so carefully maintained through every difficult moment of the past year, wavered slightly. Then I would ask you to stay, not as my ward, but as something I have wanted to ask for longer than I have allowed myself to admit. He paused, choosing his words with visible care. I am asking if you would consider building a life with me, Illyra, not out of obligation for what I have done, but because I have come to care for you more deeply than I know how to properly express. Illyra thought of the woman she had been on her knees in Thorn's kitchen, certain that hope was a luxury she could not afford. She thought of the year that had followed, the slow rebuilding of trust, the quiet kindnesses that had asked for nothing in return, and the moment she had finally found her voice again. I would like that, she said simply, and found that for the first time in longer than she could remember, the future ahead of her felt like something worth hoping for. They were married the following spring, in a small ceremony attended by those who had come to know Illyra not as a servant or a rescued woman, but simply as herself. Thorn's name faded from polite society within the year, remembered mainly as a cautionary tale of cruelty finally exposed. And Illyra, once a woman who believed her life belonged to whoever held her contract, spent the rest of her days as a woman who belonged entirely to herself, choosing each day, freely and fully, the life and the love she had built.